the friendship is sharing deal.
Because I want one of your McNuggets.
And I need some of your Quarter Pounder.
There's a deal for everyone at McDonald's. Get one favorite like 10-piece chicken McNuggets, a Quarter Pounder, or a Big Mac, and get another for just $1. Price and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.
To get the Crime Writers on Aftershow right now, go to patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And this week, the Navy taught him to kill, then accused him of murdering an ISIS prisoner. Dan Taberski explores the complex case of Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher in The Line. Then it's a community filled with suspicion about voter fraud. We'll review the new podcast from Serial and the New York Times, The Improvement Association. Joining me to get that done and more is true crime author, TV journalist, and host of the These Are Their Stories podcast, my husband and co-author Kevin Flynn. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, Rebecca.
Also with us is author, private investigator, certified pet detective, and resident cat lady, the host of the Patreon Leave It to Bricker podcast, Laura Bricker. Hello, Laura.
Hello, Rebecca.
And finally, our captain of woke cynicism, the author of the City Trilogy, host of Strange Arrivals, and the Patreon Deep Dive Book Club podcasts, Toby Ball. Hello, Toby.
C'est moi, Rebecca.
C'est moi.
Kevin, what date is it as we're recording this? It's like April 22nd or something?
Let me check my watch. It's the 22nd, yes.
Laura Bricker, why is it 12 degrees outside? Yes. What the hell is going on?
Oh, my God. It was snowing this afternoon.
Yeah. We know.
What
we have
hell?
windows. We saw. We had snow yesterday. We had hail. It was insane.
We had a ball game called on account of snow.
Yeah. No, I don't know.
And then we had hail yesterday and
climate change.
Yeah, bad storm.
And we had this insane thing like 2 days ago before it got bitch-ass cold here. We were sitting out by our little fireplace in our driveway. It's like 7 o'clock. We hear this huge boom. And Ken goes, oh my gosh, that sounds like an explosion. I wonder what Dan's doing. We find out later, it was like 3 towns over.
Yes!
Somebody was doing this gender reveal in a gravel pit, and they like exploded like 80 pounds of tannerite.
80 pounds.
Yeah.
Does anybody get hurt?
I literally, like while we were taping, I got a thing from the Boston Globe about it.
Yeah.
Wow. And so did they go, oh, look, congratulations. It's an asshole.
Yeah.
Yeah, no shit. I was like, supposedly, so it was 80 pounds of tannerite and some blue chalk. I'm like, because apparently we didn't know you had sperm, so you need to go get some like
overkill.
Freaking, like.
Yeah. Also, by the way, gender is a construct, so these reveal parties are just fucking stupid to begin with. They're stupid. Yeah. Don't do them, and especially don't blow shit up in your town.
But like 3 towns over, I literally thought it was like 2 doors from my house.
Wow.
So anyway.
Well, I guess speaking of explosive situations, should we just go ahead and start reviewing some podcasts on this podcast?
Kaboom.
All right, let's get it done. Leading off.
A young prisoner, unarmed and wounded, the last known image of him alive. And kneeling over him, Chief Eddie Gallagher, a decorated Navy SEAL, about to do something or not do something, depending on who you believe, that would brand him to many as a war criminal.
When SEAL Team 7 returned from Iraq in 2017, its members remained troubled by the actions of their chief petty officer. They said while in Mosul, Eddie Gallagher stabbed a wounded teenage ISIS prisoner to death and then posed with his corpse.
You'd make comments that he was like okay with killing women and kids, things like that. Perfectly okay with killing anybody that was moving.
While facing a court-martial for war crimes, his wife and conservative media turned the narrative away from whether Gallagher did it to why was the military punishing a decorated warrior for doing what it trained him to do.
They want us to kill guys compassionately and only under the rules of engagement that they say to. And if you kill the bad guys that we actually say are bad guys the wrong way, well, the U.S. government then is going to try you for murder and put you in jail.
Dan Taberski hosts the Apple original podcast, The Line, a deeper look into the war crimes case with interviews from the SEALs and Gallagher himself. The podcast is a separate but complementary production to an upcoming Apple TV Plus documentary of the same name. Taberski brings his unique voice to a controversial tale of how the lines between duty and dishonor are blurred in Iraq's forever war. Note, the Apple original is only available on Apple Podcasts. We are going to be talking about plot points from The Line. So if you want to remain totally spoiler-free, go to the estimated time code in our show notes for our thumbs up or thumbs down review. So Kevin, you have a complaint about this podcast right up top. And that is that it's not all out. Why are you complaining about that?
Fuck you, Dan Taberski. Why do I have to wait a week from episode to episode? I just couldn't. It was so good.
Is it Apple's fault or Dan's fault?
It's probably the big corporation's fault. But this is like when I wish the podcast could have been bingeable.
Yeah.
Because an episode would end, and it usually ended with a really great cliffhanger or something that draws you in. And I was like, I can't.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean that in as the nicest compliment that I really couldn't wait for the next one. So I'm sorry, not fuck you, Dan Taberski, because, we really like you.
Yeah. So Laura, I approach this podcast with a lot of skepticism because I feared humanizing a potential war criminal who committed egregious acts against people in a war that did not ask us to be there, and sort of putting the story at the center and not the story of the victims at the center of it, for me, on paper, seemed problematic. I think for me, what it comes down to when listening to this is Dan Taberski's writing. He goes right at a thing, says what it is, and has the most delicious turns of phrases. What do you think just about the expository writing in this show, Laura?
It's awesome. I was listening to this as I was painting on my hopefully last pandemic painting project. And the thing about Dan Taberski is he sounds so natural, but then he comes up with a way of describing something that you or I would never think of describing that way. So he describes these dogs, they're basically like three little loaves of bread. And then he's talking about something that was kind of familiar, but it wasn't.
The very best thing in the whole podcast, a piece of writing wise. Let's just drop that clip right now.
And this is UCMJ, remember, Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's not civilian law. So it's similar enough to be familiar, but it's just different enough to irk. Like a Canadian McDonald's menu.
Court will come to order.
Then he's describing the courtroom and he's like, you think you're going to be excited or it's going to look a courtroom. Don't get too excited. It looks like the break room at whatever. And
Dunder Mifflin from The Office.
Yeah. It was just, so he just has this really great way of describing things like he's talking to a friend or like he's just telling you a story. So it doesn't sound like something that's scripted. It sounds so natural, but it's also something that when you hear it, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And even big picture things that aren't, the way that he started it off describing the freeze frame, there's this picture and we're going to come back to that. And he keeps going back to that as he's telling the story. He just has a way of telling a story that makes it not only easy to follow, but I hate to say it in this case because it's a horrible story in terms of what happened, but just entertaining. He's fun to listen to.
I think, Toby, that the secret sauce to Dan Taberski, what makes him really singular in this medium is that you hear him talking to us in this way, the Canadian McDonald's, the French Bulldogs being like three loaves of bread, all that stuff. But then you also hear him talking to Navy SEALs and you hear him talking to lawyers and you hear him doing very serious interviews. And he is that guy. He's not writing for the camera, so to speak. He is writing in his own voice, and his own voice is just loose and easy. And it's very different. He's able to take us into very difficult situations and make them relatable. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, sort of. I did kind of feel like of all the podcasts that he's done, this one it feels to me like he's a little more constrained by the subject matter. I mean, I think part of what he's brought to these other things that he's done is sort of like, I don't know if a sense of whimsy is the right way of doing it, but it's sort of an optimistic view of the world, even when he's talking about things that aren't great. He feels like a kind of glass half full type guy. And I think that's a tough one for this. And so there were times when I felt like it seemed a little less natural, maybe. And I don't think that's really a matter of his writing or whatever, other than just the subject matter.
Well, if we could talk about the Taberski oeuvre for a minute here. It seems like from his first podcast, Missing Richard Simmons, coming to this one, they were all very personal, but each one, the next one got sort of less and less so. So the question becomes, can Dan Taberski do an effective podcast if he doesn't already have some sort of personal connection to it in some way? I mean, we had Missing Richard Simmons, and that was because he was friends with Richard Simmons, and, we know the rest of that story. The Surviving Y2K, one of the stories was his story about coming out to his wife, but mixed in with a lot of other things. And then the Running from Cops, again, this was like his favorite show, but again, it was less about that. Now, I don't know if Dan was ever in the service. He doesn't seem to have any sort of natural connection. So my question going into it was, can he still perform at that level? Can he still do this in his own voice? And I think we've established that, yeah, his writing is great, and that when you hear him interview people, he's the same guy that you hear narrating, right? He's not a different person, like reading off of a clipboard and just getting the next soundbite. So I actually I think I know what you're saying, Toby, about, Missing Richard Simmons is a lot lighter than talking about a war crime, and yet he can still have a funny aside without ruining the gravitas that he's bringing to these interviews. So, yeah, it's a different flavor, but I still think he's doing it well.
I'm not trying to say that it's a great podcast, clearly.
Yeah, I didn't take you saying that, but yeah.
It was just something a little different, and I think maybe part of it is like, I don't know, it seems like the other podcasts he's done, like they're clearly things he has chosen to do, right? Like he's kind of come up with like an interesting topic and then done a podcast about them, but I don't think like the world was crying out for a podcast about cops. I think that was something that he figured out was going to be super interesting and did something about. This seems like a little bit different, in which this is sort of an important national story that he's taken on. And I guess the mission is slightly different in this case than it has been in other cases, because I think there's a little bit more, I don't know if it's national import or their lines are drawn a little more clearly on either side of this issue. Anyway, that was just sort of my impression.
Laura, one of the things I love about the story we've gotten so far is we don't just get the story of this one Navy SEAL. We get the story of what Navy SEALs are, how they're made, the things they have in common. There's this whole look at the psychology of what makes a successful SEAL, which is basically somebody who won't give up even if their leg is chopped off and they can't run anymore and they haven't eaten. Like they just can't give up. And that's a kind of grit that's frightening. It's like they all got into motorcycle accidents. They've all had traumatic childhoods. I think that stuff is really important because as much as I cringe at the idea of like humanizing someone like Eddie Gallagher, and I do personally cringe at that idea, getting all of that stuff about the SEALs out there and just showing us what it is, like that is important for us to be able to swallow a story like this. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Going into this, my exposure to Navy SEALs was, we have one Navy SEAL from our town who died in the line of duty. And so that's the story I always hear about. Like he was like the last one to the helicopter and got everybody out type story. So you hear these stories of like heroism. And for me, I feel like the way that this was set up, where we hear about the type of things that Navy SEALs, number one, go through in their training, where it's like basically insane amount of time being up and going through this, like swimming in the freezing cold. And what was it called? I can't remember when.
The sugar cookie.
Wait, stop. What's a sugar cookie?
A sugar cookie is when they make you get completely wet. You come into the dry sand and they make you roll over like a sugar cookie. So you got sand. Sand's got to cover your entire body and your head. And if anything's not covered with sand, because the ocean is 55 degrees, you run back out to the ocean, you jump in, come back, and you sugar cookie again.
And, they're not eating and this is going on. So you hear about the training and you're like, oh my God, like I would last like 5 minutes. And then you hear about what they're actually doing on their missions. And this is why I think it was important to tell this, because, they're basically being trained to kill on these missions. They're being, trained as assassins in missions of all sorts of different types. So when you hear that is what they're going in for, I think for me, that sort of put the story into a perspective, because they're being told to kill. They're doing this, they're doing that, but they can only do it a certain way. And I think hearing what so many of them had so many similar stories of, like, you always remember your first kill. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, just thinking about the psyche of somebody that is able to not only go through the training, but then to actually carry out that mission. It's a certain type of person that's able to do that. And so I think for me, that's what I was left with, is like, okay, I understand what type of person this is. I'm not jumping to the same conclusion as quickly as I might have about this story, knowing that background, if that makes sense.
Kevin, how surprised were you to hear that Eddie Gallagher himself was going to be in this podcast?
Oh my God, I nearly went off the road because it's such a good get. And usually I did not expect at all we would hear from Gallagher as the defendant in this case. And he sort of drops it at the end of episode 1. I'm like, is that Gallagher? And I'm like, I got to get the next episode. And he does, there's a couple of really good cliffhangers where, like, stuff that you don't expect him to have, he has. And the end of 3 was, we're going to hear tape from the court-martial that you can never get.
That has been completely sealed, that no one can get. Somehow we have it.
I'm not going to ask too many questions because, maybe a SEAL shows up at Taberski's apartment and wants all that tape back or something. But yeah, I mean, does a really good job. It's put together very well. And to piggyback on Laura's thought here, that one of the things that we do get is that we do hear from a lot of other SEALs about what it takes in order to do this kind of work. And the fact, you talk about, you remember your first kill. But the way they're saying it, it's not like, like you remember your first girlfriend. It's like you did it, and then not too long afterwards, you feel really bad about that. You hang on to that. A lot of those guys are troubled by having had to do that. Or
not all of them.
Not all of them. Not all of them will admit to it. The guy who was working with the Iraqi interrogator, and his guilt over that, torture and not torture, and all that other stuff. For a lot of guys, even though the literal algorithm to find these guys are people that are maybe
lack empathy,
lack empathy, and are a little less restrained than most of us. It's still a human experience to do some of this stuff, and you can be trained to kill, but then when you actually kill, it's for a lot of people, it's a different experience. And I thought that was very humanizing. And like Taberski hung out with these guys, and he says, if he says about somebody he's a good hang, then he's a good hang.
Dan is absolutely terrifying, and also kind of a good hang, which is how I would describe a lot of the SEALs I've met over the past year. If you're looking for intensity, go find yourself a SEAL.
That's one of the things I like, is that he puts the bad out there and names it in a way that another podcast we'll talk about later in the show troubles me that they don't. He says they had a sewing circle text thread. The word faggot was thrown around a lot. He just names it, and then he moves on. He gives you the bad and just tells you what it is without you having to be like, let me judge for myself whether or not these guys are toxic, masculine, and homophobic. He just tells you, and then he moves on. I never thought I would want to hear a word from Eddie Gallagher. I never thought I would want to listen to that interview from he and his wife about all the tactics they employed around his trial. But all that setup made it, I don't want to say palatable, but that's how it felt. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think so. So I thought, and this is kind of going off of what Kevin was talking about, I think it's the first episode where they talk to a guy who's 100% gung-ho about we didn't go in there to kill some people. We went there to dominate the area and fucking, clear people out. And and you're hearing all this stuff, kill, kill, kill. And then he's also like reflecting on, after your first kill and you go and you're like acting all macho in front of your buddies and you go back to your room and you cry.
In your brain, you talk about, I'm going to kill motherfuckers. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that until the first time you kill somebody. And then people congratulate you and you smile and you go, fuck yeah. And you go in your room and you cry.
It feels like he establishes kind of a baseline, which is the people we're dealing with. It's not like your neighbor. Like these guys, like their mission is to kill a whole bunch of people and they're very good at it. And that's kind of what their deal is. But they're also in this way. So that when Gallagher comes on, he seems to be missing that, but they're also this way part of it, right?
Exactly.
He's just like a killing machine. He's not very circumspect about it. He totally has this sort of black and white view about things. Like, I don't think he gives it much thought. I mean, basically he's there to kill a whole bunch of people and, kill them all, let God sort them out type of thing.
Can I ask you a question, Toby? Because
sure.
I do feel like he's like an apex predator, but not in a sexy way, like in a bad way, right? And that's what we're leading to. It's so bad that when we hear about other horrible things that all of these soldiers that our government is doing, it's like, oh, that's how war goes. Like we hear in the podcast that one of the tactics is to deprive a whole city of water, period, because ISIS has taken over. But even like the regular people who live there are not allowed to go to the river and have water, will be shot if they do. He is so cold that we are, as a listener, like, I mean, we know that other thing with the water is horrible and it's horrifying, but it gives you a stage on which we think he's bad even on that stage, like it's bad. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's what you were getting at.
That's what makes it effective though, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Because otherwise it's just, it would be very easy without sort of that context to be like, well, it's a war,
right.
That's just kind of the way it goes. But because you've talked to these other guys who are also super elite, super destructive, they've got one mission, then you have context for being like, okay, well, this is a little bit different. Like this guy is missing something that these other people have. Like these other SEALs who've gone through the same stuff they have are like shooting close to people to scare them away so that Gallagher won't kill them.
Right.
And that's just, I don't know. He doesn't seem to have that part of his psyche that would make that calculation.
It seems like it sets up a good question about, we see these other SEALs and that the stress and the things that they do wear on them in certain ways and starts to break them down. And then we have Gallagher, and you either go in thinking that Gallagher, is he the defect or is he the product of going through what everybody else is going through, but way more intense? Essentially, did we make Gallagher the way he is by giving him this command and telling him he needs to do this and that and the other thing? Because they certainly make the case that he was very competent, but over time he's been acting very weird and, being more bloodthirsty, and he didn't walk into theater that way, but he walked out.
Laura, I want to talk about another character in the podcast that is fucking fascinating to me. And I would love to be in a fly on the wall for this marriage. I just want to see what they are like when they are together because I have so many questions about how you can be in a relationship with either one of them and then how the two of them would be together. But I want to talk about Andrea Gallagher, a.k.a. the Better Business Babe.
She's a better business babe.
The Better Business Babe. It's a way to do your business better and you get there faster.
She even has a branded phone number. The last 4 digits are BABE, babe. She's a better business babe. It's even fun to say. That's branding.
So, Laura, Eddie Gallagher's wife is a branding expert, and she puts all of her brand expertise toward this public relations campaign to make America feel differently about this soldier who his entire platoon says murdered this young man. What do you think of Andrea and her branding campaign?
I was kind of amazed at how forthcoming she was with Dan about her branding campaign, because to me that sort of defeats the purpose of the branding campaign in a way, because, you want people to organically come to the conclusion of what she's trying to convince them of, that he was doing his job, that he's been, railroaded, that this didn't happen. But it was really fascinating listening to her. Like, first of all, she kind of scares the shit out of me. But just listening to her going on all of the like right-wing, super right-wing podcasts, talk shows, news stations, and repeating this mantra and this story about her husband was really interesting. And the one that I sort of fixated on a little bit was like that, she kind of was harping on that those were a bunch of like millennial seals who were a bunch of pussies.
Yep.
And I think to some, there is a segment that is probably going to connect with.
Boomers, you mean? You're talking about boomers?
Well, these damn millennials. But also, then on the flip side, I'm like, okay, so you can keep repeating that. The millennial pussies, they just, whatever. But is it that? Or, when you step back from her analysis and think maybe it's just that the millennials actually aren't going to turn a blind eye like older seals who have been maybe seeing things like this for a long time and actually going to report something like this when it happens. But I don't know. She scared the shit out of me. I thought she was a super interesting character. I can't believe she was as forthcoming as she was. And I totally want to look her up, which I haven't yet because I just find her super interesting.
Yeah. I will say millennials are responsible for all the positive social change happening in every office in America right now. So there is something to what Laura just said. But Toby, what did you actually think of her messaging here? I mean, her PR campaign basically switched the narrative from he didn't do it to, yeah, he did it, but who cares? It's what he was hired to do, which is something. What did you think of the tactics there, Toby?
I mean, it's just tried and true stuff, right? It's like, who do you blame? You blame millennials, you blame the media, and you blame liberals. It's not millennials or liberals or the media who are making up rules of engagement that are telling what they can and can't do on the battlefield. Those weren't the people who did the Geneva Conventions. If you're willing to say, yeah, he did it, but so what? That's, there are rules. I mean, that's military discipline, right? Is that you follow those rules. And you can not like the rules, but they're the rules. So if he's found to have broken them and you're willing to admit that he did, fighting a battle about whether there should be rules like that, it seems kind of beside the point, except for trying to sway, Donald Trump, essentially, I guess. I mean, there's like a certain audience that's going to be receptive to this, but I don't know how in a military courtroom, it doesn't seem like it's very germane at all. But whether that whole thing actually is like a rational argument. I think there is a tension between training people to kill and then telling them you can only do it in certain ways. But that's why you have like strict discipline in the military, I believe. I mean, I'm not a military guy, but my understanding is that's part of it, is because there are rules. And part of the reason why you have rules is because you don't want one of your guys to get captured and have some guy on the other side like chop him up when he's supposed to be giving him first aid. I mean, that's, it's reciprocal. So it came off to me as being pretty cynical, but that might be the only hand they felt like they had. And that just may have been the way they had to go. Listen,
it took off. It worked.
Yeah.
I keep thinking about the parallels between like this case and the SEALs and police misconduct. I think about the Chauvin trial, because in both cases, we give authority and training to people to do dangerous work. We also give them the ability to use deadly force in certain cases. Now, I mean, the difference is that police are supposed to be peacemakers and SEALs are supposed to be war makers. But in any event, we do put some parameters around it. And then when we hear of someone who abuses that charge and purposely uses deadly force on a non-threatening subject, we all know that that's wrong. But there is, in both cases, this wall of silence about the misconduct, and nobody wants to point. And in this case, we do have some SEALs who come forward and speak up and remember their oath, and then we have others that won't. And then lastly, you've got a jury that ends up being sympathetic to the defendant because regardless of the law, they've been through the same thing, or they're simpatico with them, regardless of what the law is. And that makes it disheartening.
I just kept thinking, and Toby, I saw you made a note about this, about how some people in the podcast refer to Iraqis and the people involved in this story as old men, as children, as people, and then the people who are sort of on the PR Andrea Gallagher side of it, it's just like terrorist, right? The use of language is so specific, which I just have a question about one character who's just not doing that, but who's also on Gallagher's side, which is his brother. I found him so fascinating because he's this incredibly empathetic human guy who doesn't seem to buy any of Gallagher's wife's PR, but also is like, I don't want my brother to go to prison for the rest of his life. And he's willing to go on this crazy motorcycle podcast to defend his brother.
That's funny.
When did you go on Insane Throttle Biker News?
Oh my God. Dude, I'm so pumped you know about that.
Pumped. I listened to the whole thing.
You listened to the whole thing?
No, not really. I listened to that. I listened to a bunch of it.
Laura, what did you think of him? I mean, I found him to be very complicated, but also one of the things that made the story the most human. I found him to actually be the most human character in this so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, when I think of military families, I guess I kind of think I'm lumping everybody in that same rah-rah, pro-military sort of bucket. And then we have this brother who's living in D.C. I think he's a scientist.
A climate advocate scientist working in Congress. Yeah.
Totally different. But at the same time, when I heard the scene that you were talking about where he goes on this crazy podcast and he doesn't even really know what he's getting into when he's getting to and they're all "Rah!" And then he comes in, he's yeah, hi. But he did really humanize the story because he was a very genuine character. He was very personable, but sincere and not in line with a lot of the other characters that we were hearing from, who were all sort of from the SEAL Group 6, SEAL Group 5, SEAL Group whatever. I mean, this was somebody that was from a different perspective that still was invested in the outcome of what's going on with Eddie Gallagher.
Well, I think we should do what we do. Let's let our listeners know, should they check out The Line? It is the first big blockbuster podcast from Apple, who's now gotten into the podcast game themselves instead of just being a platform for other shows. Dan Taberski is the host of The Line. It's making a big splash both on the app and in the media. Laura Bricker, what do you think? Thumbs up or thumbs down for The Line?
This is a big thumbs up. Obviously, it's difficult subject matter, but I think, honestly, I talk to people about podcasts that we listen to and that we recommend. I'm there's certain people that if they make a podcast, you're going to listen to. And Dan Taberski is one of those people. It's Dan Taberski, Connie Walker. There's certain people, and he just has such a great way of telling a story. And some of his expressions, I'm I would love to steal them because they're so creative and interesting. But he's also telling a really huge story, and he's got all the right people involved. Everybody that you want to hear from is included in this podcast, but he's telling it in the Dan Taberski way so that it is engaging and interesting. And every once in a while, there's kind of a funny moment, even though it's pretty heavy material. So I would say big thumbs up.
Toby Ball, what about you? Thumbs up or thumbs down for The Line?
Yeah, I'm a big thumbs up. Sort of echoing what Laura said. I mean, I think there's a small group of podcasters who you just look forward to whatever they're going to put out. Maybe they could be the one name podcasters,
the Prince of podcasting.
It's like when you talk about Michael in basketball, everybody knows you're talking about Jordan or whatever. So, I feel like we talk about Connie and Madeline and Amber, and maybe we can talk about Dan now. But yeah, it's good. It's very tough. It's complicated. In some ways it's complicated. In some ways it's not fucking complicated at all. But I think it's complicated because of the country we live in right now. And it's just well done. And I think part of it, you guys were talking about how good the writing was, which I agree with. But sometimes I think part of the thing is he just lets people talk. And you just get so much from that and the way they've kind of sequenced different conversations and stuff. So, it's really good. I think it's going to be one of those ones that kind of gets put up on the best of the last, 5-year lists or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I can't imagine why you wouldn't listen to this if you listen to our podcast. This is the kind of stuff that you should listen to.
Kevin Flynn.
Well, Of course, I'm a big thumbs up on this, obviously. It's a masterclass in both how to interview and how to write. And I wish that I had thought about everything I wanted to say about the way he uses the courtroom tape, the way he uses it the right way.
This is a good time to say that. Go ahead, say it.
Okay, Uncover Dead Wrong, where it was just big lumps of audio tape from a trial, and then the narrator would come on and just sort of tell you what the next thing is going to be. During all the trial stuff, Dan is telling you what's going on, but he's using the tape to enhance what he is saying instead of just putting some audio wallpaper. It's so smart. It's the way it should be done. Look, he's been a darling since missing Richard Simmons. His voice is unique. He is funny in the right places. He is infinitely conversational. He is thoughtful to both sides without doing the whataboutisms. And he even breaks some news in this. So Alex Gibney is doing the Apple TV Plus documentary component, and I'm sorry, Alex, but Taberski just set a fucking high bar. In fact, go send Alex Gibney an edible arrangement, and the message should be, Taberski fucking ate your lunch. And you can put that on the poster. Kevin Flynn says Taberski ate your fucking lunch.
Okay.
And anyway, it's a thumbs up.
Yeah. So on paper, I'll tell you personally, I should hate everything about this podcast. We should read about it on paper. The story about a murder accusation of a person of color in a part of the world that we should not be in, where we are committing war crimes. It's a podcast that centers the white perpetrator of that potential crime, told by a white person and sort of through the very American perspective. I should hate everything about this podcast. I love everything about this podcast because it does everything I want it to do while also doing this impossibly gymnastic combination of light and dark. Dan in his writing does not shy away from the horrors and the crimes and what actually happened here and how cold and wrong so much of it is. And yet he still manages to include the alleged perpetrator and all these other people that you just want to hate without humanizing them in a way that makes you like them, but humanizing them in a way that reminds you that they are people. It doesn't engender sympathy or empathy, but it grounds you in the story in a way that it's very easy to stand away from and be like, that thing. No, it's like that person can be evil. He can be whatever you think. But I don't know. It's a gymnastic feat. And I just can't say enough about this podcast, The Line. I think it's fantastic. Huge thumbs up for me.
The friendship is sharing deal.
Because I want one of your McNuggets.
And I need some of your Quarter Pounder.
There's a deal for everyone at McDonald's. Get one favorite like 10-piece chicken McNuggets, a Quarter Pounder, or a Big Mac, and get another for just $1. Price and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.
Jewelry isn't a gift you give just once. It's a way to remind your loved one of a beautiful moment every time they see it. Blue Nile can help you find the gift that says how you feel and says it beautifully, with expert guidance and a wide assortment of jewelry of the highest quality at the best price. Go to BlueNile.com and experience the convenience of shopping Blue Nile, the original online jeweler since 1999. That's BlueNile.com to find the perfect jewelry gift for any occasion. BlueNile.com.
So, Kevin, here we are in the business section.
Kevin, what do
we got going on our Patreon today?
Well, we have the new Crime Writers on Aftershow. It's in your feeds right now.
What are we talking about?
My midlife crisis.
You straight up are having a midlife crisis, Kevin. It's not a car. It's something worse.
It's something, it's worse.
Look at that haircut. It's worse.
She's 25. She's 36, 24, 36.
You wish.
Yeah, I wish. We have a new Leave It to Bricker out, and it's the shots heard around the world. Laura last time talked with Fireman Ken, about their local COVID vaccination clinic. And Laura, you ended up hearing from a bunch of our listeners from around the country and around the world about the things that they're doing on the front lines.
Yeah, I thought it was so awesome. So you guys know I've become like this vaccine evangelist. I'm at the clinic every weekend registering people. I love giving out the stickers. And it turned out so many of our amazing listeners are doing similar things at local clinics in their area. So we hear from all of them. And we also hear from 2 in the UK. It was just great to hear what is happening kind of to get us out of this stage of pandemic life, and that it's our amazing listeners who are helping us and helping their fellow humans. I loved it. It made me so happy to hear from people.
And people still have a little time to finish up the latest book that's going to be featured on the Deep Dive Book Club. The book is Hidden Valley Road by Bob Kolker. And Toby, tell us a little bit about who is going to be on that panel. That supersized panel that you booked.
Supersized.
Yes.
It's like Canadian McDonald's, your panel.
My panel is nothing like Canadian McDonald's. So
not that much mayonnaise.
That's right. So no particular order. We have Nadina Cranford,
yay,
a longtime friend of the podcast. We have Keith Sharon, who is a journalist who you may know from the Crime Beat podcast, but is now with the Nashville Tennessean, just south of the Mason-Dixon line. We have Rabia Chaudhry.
Who's that?
Who's Rabia Chaudhry?
Just kidding.
Rebecca, I'm surprised. I thought you were good friends with her.
I am.
And last but not least, we have Dr. Scott from LA Not So Confidential. He is a forensic psychologist, so he will know what he's talking about, which is always nice to have somebody like that on the panel. And it should be really good. I don't know how it's going to go with 5 people, but it's 5 super interesting people who I think are going to have interesting things to say, and me.
Just make it long. Kevin's editing it. Make it as long as you want.
Super. It's going to be just absolutely. It's going to be hours.
Epic. Kevin, before we do the other thing we do, can you just tell people why they should subscribe to the Crime Writers On newsletter at crimewriterson.com? Can you just tell them, because it's so freaking great?
Yeah, every Monday you're going to get a newsletter that has everything from photos of our cat of the week to information about what we're going to be doing in the upcoming week, behind the scenes stuff, a little summary of our review, tweet of the week. It's just packed with a lot of great information, and it costs absolutely nothing.
It's free.
It's free. So go to justcrimewriterson.com, and you'll see right at the top of the page, just put your email address in. That's all we need from you.
Sometimes there are cheeky photos of the panel in the newsletter. It's great.
You just never know.
All right, Kevin, do we have any Patreon patron saints of the week this week?
Our Patreon patron saints are Joanne True and Kim Brooks. Bless you.
And before we end the business section, Kevin, if people want to support the show on Patreon and get all 4 podcasts that we make for Behind the Firewall, the Book Club, Laura's podcast, the Crime Writers on After Show, and of course our advice show, Married with Podcast, how do they do that, Kevin?
All they got to do is go to patreon.com/partners in crime media.
And thus ends
the business
section. Moving on.
Down in Bladen County, where the congressional scandal took place, there are many people who believe the journalists, the authorities, all of us, we got this whole story wrong. They say the real election cheaters are still at work in the county, bullying, tampering, stealing votes.
In 2018, when North Carolina elections officials investigated a confirmed case of illegal ballot harvesting by a congressional candidate, they also entertained insinuations without any evidence that a local political action committee for Black residents also conducts voter fraud.
Jane thinks the PAC, what they're really doing, their presence at the polls, it isn't helping or supporting Black voters, it's harassing them, pressuring them into voting a certain way.
Over the past decade, as the Bladen County Improvement Association had more success at the ballot box, an increasing cycle of suspicion grew between conservative white and progressive Black voters, believing each was disenfranchising the other.
So I'm like, what? Show me something. I want to see it. You know?
Mm-hmm. Time will tell. Yep, time will tell.
The Improvement Association, a new podcast from Serial Productions and the New York Times, looks into the effects of voter fraud allegations on a small community. Host Zoe Chase shows it doesn't take lies about sweeping nationwide ballot stuffing to destabilize the institution, that the simple mistrust of a neighbor can do the same thing. Now, we are going to be talking about plot points for the Improvement Association, so to remain spoiler-free, go to the estimated time code in our show notes to hear our thumbs up or thumbs down reviews. Now, Laura, you have done a lot of reporting like Zoe Chase is doing in this podcast, standing around outside polls, going to really boring local community meetings. What do you hear when you hear a podcast like this, a big national podcast made by Serial that is basically a lot of local shoe leather?
All news is local. I mean, how many times have you guys heard that in the newsroom? And, as I was listening to this, I could just relate to it so much because it was like, we're going inside like county politics and you've got all these different personalities. You've got the guy who's like holding court in the back of the furniture store. And that's like where you have to go if you want to know what's going on. It reminds me, like, I remember, I had a guy, I used to have to go in like the back of the convenience store in like the stocking area to get the news after the state police came in there. So it reminded me so much of, I'm sure there's so many small towns and small communities around the country that have such a similar dynamic. But the other thing that I heard here a lot of, and it's something that I've noticed on a local level, and I'm hearing it here, this rise in partisan politics in local races. So like when I first started covering any kind of local board elections or local races, I never heard who was a Democrat and who was a Republican. It was supposed to be all nonpartisan, and that's totally gone out the window now. And you get email from whatever, party you're in. Oh, vote for this person, vote for that person. So I think that it's just a great window into what's happening all around the world, but it's something that I think a lot of people can relate to if they live in a small community.
Now, Kevin, Zoe Chase is a very singular reporter. We've heard her on public radio. We've heard her on This American Life. We've heard her in like numerous storytelling situations. What do you think of her as our advocate for the listener in this story, our guide, so to speak?
Well, I like her here more than I have in other things. She kind of tries to kind of be cute sometimes, and like that doesn't work so well on a story about the stock market. So she's really cut out for this kind of first-person narrative journalism. She's perfectly suited for this kind of a podcast.
Yeah. Now, Toby, this podcast is about white supremacy, right?
Yes.
So just talk a little bit about the white people we hear in this podcast and the things you hear them saying.
Where do you start? So I think this is kind of, it's another aspect of the stuff that, say, we looked at it in The Dark season 2, which is like, how do you maintain a white controlled society in a way that goes back a couple hundred years or more? So in the new battleground, or a battleground that continues, but is getting more press recently, I think because it's been kind of amped up a little bit, is voting. And it's a combination of things. And one of them is, I think, fear. It seems to me pretty clear that one of the concerns they have, and they talk about this with the sheriff, is like the sheriff isn't just like the person who decides who gets charged with what or who gets arrested or whatever, but they also just like know what's going on, right? They know people's secrets and stuff. And that's really the fear with having a black sheriff, is that you'll have this black person who knows all these white people's secrets, right?
Have to come by you. So at that point in time, ain't no more secrets.
So what's that have to do with Prentice running for sheriff?
Everything he had, they didn't want him knowing everything that came through that system.
The sheriff knows people's business in the county, the human part, the embarrassing or the tragic, as well as the criminal or the unethical.
Again, it's sort of upsetting, the way society has been there. And I think that's sort of coupled with this idea that if black people get power, they're going to treat the white people the way the white people have been treating the black people for, however long. And that's scary too. So it just seems like there's a lot of fear, I guess, is what it comes down to. The fear drives, like, how do we maintain power in situations where it's becoming less and less tenable, I guess.
Yeah. I'll just say I found parts of this podcast very troubling in the way that some of that was handled. I have a lot of concerns about in 2021 reporting that gives people who are very clearly racist and motivated by racist beliefs and who lie on behalf of their racist beliefs, giving them the same amount of airtime and oxygen as you give the people who've been oppressed by these people. The one thing that I will say, and, you know, I am listening to this with a very open mind. I think it's a very well-reported story, and it's, for the most part, a very, very good podcast. But when Zoe said in the episode, the most recent episode, that the guy Ray Britt, who's sort of like the king of the, you know, the conspiracy theories in this community in the back of the furniture store, when she tried to prove his shitty, completely fake assertion about this nursing home story and it being cheating with getting these, quote, infirm and doddering old people to vote the way that the Black Caucus wanted them to vote, she said in the podcast, she wanted to make Ray believe, like, I'm looking for facts that would make it change his mind.
But some of us know.
But why won't you tell? I guess is my question. Why won't you just explain it to me so that, I don't know, just so I can see the full picture? Because I still feel like I'm squinting a little bit.
Keep squinting. Sometimes you squint, you can focus a little better.
That's not what we need right now for me. It's like the thing that Dan Taberski does in his podcast is he tells you who people are. This person's terrifying. This person, this. Zoe gives racists, including Ray Britt, including Jane Pate, who may be one of the most horrifying characters I've ever met in a podcast. She treats them with the same, not dignity like in person, of course she does it to everybody, but with the same narrative touch that she treats people who have been disenfranchised. And I understand what she's doing. It's like, let them say it, let them hang themselves, let them show the listener who they are. We already know who they are. I feel like we could have gone a little stronger and she could have just said at the outset, this is based on white supremacy, this is racist, now let's listen to what that sounds like. Kevin, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree with some of that. I mean, I think what is important, though, to give them the time, because I think the point is to show that I've proven that this is not right. I'm showing you that this is not right. And we all assume if she can do that, then they'll say, oh, you're right, we were incorrect. But
no, we don't assume that.
Well, she is demonstrating for us that, look, the facts do not matter because they just want to believe what they want to believe. And that's what she's accomplished. Look, the thing that I'm doing now, my midlife crisis, is that I'm learning how to become a baseball umpire.
Yeah.
And one of the
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. One of the things they teach us is to not over officiate. So if somebody swings at a pitch, you don't also have to yell strike because everybody already knows it's a strike. There's no need to come out and be full-throated pointing out racist.
And that's what I'm saying.
Because
not what I'm saying.
Okay. Because the audience is sophisticated enough to see it. And so to just put it out there, and you're right, let them hang themselves, that's fine. We know why the white conservative part of that community is suspicious of the black political action community that has success in getting their candidates elected. There's one more episode of the podcast left. If they don't ever, with a giant magic marker, circle, this is rooted in the Klan or something like that, it is still an interesting story. I don't feel like you need to do more than that and over officiate it. It's very clear what's going on.
Yeah, I'm not, just to be clear, and I don't want to argue with you, babe, because you're not wrong. But to be clear, for me, it's not that they're doing it the wrong way. It's that they're doing it in a very 2014 way.
Yeah, okay.
Like, I feel like we don't need to start at the beginning with a story like this anymore.
Yeah.
And this story started at the beginning as if we've never heard of any of these issues and we don't know why they exist.
Right.
Like, the audience,
and I'm not saying that race is not intrinsically tied with voter suppression and right, but the focus, she's good about staying on the focus about voter fraud. And look, it's bullshit. Don't you believe it's bullshit? You don't.
I'm just saying, if that sounds very 2014.
Okay,
You know what it sounds like? Do you remember when in Serial, when Sarah Koenig, when she was talking to Deirdre Enright from the Innocence Project, and Deirdre Enright was like, oh, if you read this indictment and all these things, they're super racially tinged, talking about the dangerous Muslim. And Sarah Koenig was like, well, I don't know. Like this has some of that. What do you think,
Well,
Laura?
you know what it is? I think it's that Zoe is so earnest in the way that she reports that I think for me, when I'm listening, that sort of personality comes across in that same way that you were just talking about.
So when you hear her talking, like trying to convince Ray, do you feel like it's worth trying to convince Ray, or is it just worth trying to get Ray to like give her what she needs to report?
Yeah. No. I mean, I don't know. At some point,
convincing Ray.
I don't know. It was a little too earnest for me, but that was just me.
Laura, squint harder.
I think
you need to squint harder because I know things. I'm not going to say it, but I know things.
Time will tell.
Time will tell.
I don't think evidence matters to Ray.
No.
Or Jane.
I mean, he's got a worldview, and that's more important than facts.
Right.
I think.
Do you think Marshall Tudor, Toby, the elections investigator who actually went to the nursing home and actually did all these things, do you think he's like a super liberal, like hippie? That guy who's just like, no, I just didn't find anything. Like, I mean, that's what is to me is like so stunning is that, if you have a spectrum of reason among the people in this podcast, right? And you're putting, Ray at the far end of that spectrum of reason. Like probably in the real world, you would put the elections investigator, like, somewhere in the middle, maybe toward, whatever. But like, he's certainly not like a conspiracy hippie who's just trying to like undermine elections in his state, right?
Don't be so sure, Rebecca.
Yeah. That sounds like some member of the liberal media for you. There's a lot to say about a lot of this stuff, but
yeah.
I think there's an ideology there that's being protected, and I don't think if he even believes this nursing home stuff, like, I don't know, that to me, it kind of seemed like a talking point.
Yeah.
It's like something like, oh yeah, but what about this? Like, that seems like to be a big thing. What aboutism? Oh, they're doing it much worse than we are.
Right.
Well, he's also has a horse in the race, as they say, or a dog in the fight, because he was a booster of McCrae Dowless, who actually did illegally ballot harvest and, was convicted of it. So of course he's going to go, well, nothing about that, but how about these guys over here?
Do you know what I've come to realize is like a signpost of what an evil or just bad person is actually doing?
They accuse you of doing the thing they're actually doing.
100%. If you want to know what shit someone is doing, listen to what they accuse somebody else of doing. That's always the way, right? And I just kept thinking, Kevin,
like when Toby's stealing cable TV?
Yeah, 100%.
Do you remember you guys know you're all journalists, but I remember, Kevin, when I first started writing with you and I hadn't had a lot of journalism experience, we were talking about libel and slander, and you were saying that there are some things you can never say about people because unless you have like photos, it's they're in the mob.
There's some things that are on their face libels,
or they're a child molester.
Yeah.
Like there are certain things. If you think about like everything that's happened with this, with QAnon, with everything, they just go straight for it. They're just like all the things. Let's put them all together. It's a cabal of voter lies. It's like, no, it's not. You literally are doing the thing that you're saying people did. I don't know. Laura, what did you think of Jane Pate? I found her to be a super interesting character. Did you want to bless her heart as much as I did?
Oh, absolutely. They can see everything you're doing. They can hear every word that's said. And somebody comes from your community around there and says, this is what we want you to do. And they stand right there while you do it. Or they stick their arm inside the car and help you do it. Where's your choice?
Because again, I can relate. Anytime I hear, there's people like this everywhere. And my approach is always to be like, smile and nod. And like this year we had there was 2 different factions in our local school race this year. And, it was pretty obvious which side I was on. And as I was walking into the polls this year, I got heckled by a similar lady. And she was like, don't you want your child to be back in school? Okay, now she didn't have a Southern accent, but I'm channeling this podcast.
Oh my God.
And I was like,
you're painting her right now.
And I was like, actually, my kid is in school. He's right out on that ball field behind you, right there. And she's like, oh. So I've dealt with these people. So when I hear her, I'm just like,
These people.
I don't know. I don't think he actually is in school. I've heard things.
It might be a body double.
One of my favorite lines, and listen, I don't know if this is true or not, I just have assumptions, is when Jane talks about all her Black and Latino friends coming to vote in the same thing. And I'm like, I don't think you have a lot of Black friends, Jane Payne. No. And if you do...
You know a lot of Black people.
I don't
You
think
don't have a lot of Black friends.
I don't think they're going to be your friend after listening to this fucking podcast.
Yeah.
All right, so let's just talk about like the second chapter of this briefly before we do our review, which is my favorite character in the podcast, Minnie, who kind of points out some of the rot that she sees happening in this PAC, the Improvement Association, which is that, you know, the men who sort of took the lead on it and were putting the voting block together, which they make a very good case for why a voting block is important, because it is, and it's also just politics, as Zoe points out, how they have come to view their power, superseding the election of their party's candidates. I thought that was a very interesting turn in the story. Toby, what did you think of that sort of look inside the organization, especially as we hear Horace and so forth basically wanting to tank the Democratic candidate because, you know, he wasn't comfortable aligning himself with their quote unquote damaged PAC?
Yeah, it's another sort of complicated thing, right? It's that you can kind of see like the sort of the idealistic aspect of it, which is, if we don't have power as a PAC, there's really nothing to keep white representatives of us kind of representing our interests unless they count on us to deliver votes. Like that's our leverage. On the other hand, what's more important, maintaining the importance of your organization or electing somebody who aligns with your beliefs? And, if you're choosing your organization, like, I feel like you have to have a hell of a lot of confidence that what your organization is doing is right all the time and that it's representative of like the vast majority of the people who you say you're representing. So, it's a tough one. I mean, I think it's one of those things where you can have idealism on each side of that issue and you can have practicality on each side of that issue. And especially in a situation like that where the numbers aren't on your side, so you have to find leverage where you can. And really that is by voting as a block. Like, is there going to be an alternative way to deliver that block of votes if the association suddenly doesn't have the same power? So I thought that was interesting. It was kind of a conundrum. Like, I kind of know where I come down, but I realize that it's a tough one. Like, there's no absolute right or wrong in the conversation.
And the intent of its opponents in accusing the Improvement Association of, misdeeds is to give sort of, oh, what about them, and deflect the attention, but also B, to weaken its influence,
to break up the block,
to break up the block and make it a less influential political organization. And that is exactly what happened, where in that race, Harris's opponent, was it McCready? Backed off from them, and then now there's all this internal conflict, and they're not going to be able to, it seems, have the same kind of punch as they did before, because as Miss Minnie points out, they're damaged goods.
Yeah.
There's a political logic to that, and in a political science sense, it's very simple. It's very obvious that that's kind of what was going to happen once they got tarred with that brush.
Right. I mean, there is a real parallel here that you can draw in like national politics with, and this is not me making a judgment. This is just me telling what happened. Like hardcore Bernie Sanders supporters who didn't turn out in 2016 because they were just pissed, because they felt wronged by the Democratic Party. And it's a very good case you can make that they were wronged by the Democratic Party, but ultimately they just didn't come out. And then they got something that was very different than anything close to palatable for them. For them, that's kind of the case that Minnie is making, very pragmatic case. But aside from the political pragmatism, Laura, how much do you love a woman, a 73-year-old woman at a meeting, being told how the budget of the organization works? And she's like, I'm the fucking treasurer of this organization. What did you think of her just as like a character in the story, Laura?
That's awesome. Because again, you hear local voices and you hear local personalities. And I think when you're listening to county meetings or local meetings or even certain state meetings, I think you're hearing people that are a lot more candid than you might hear in like the Senate or, something like that. So yeah, don't mess with the 73-year-old lady. Sorry. I loved all these local voices like hers.
Yeah, me too. Well, I think we should do what we do. Let's let our listeners know, should they check out the Improvement Association? It's the latest podcast from our friends at Serial. I say our friends like if I say it, it's true. From our friends at Serial Productions. Like, you hear Sarah, my friend Sarah's voice at the beginning of the podcast.
Yeah, one name's.
It's pretty great.
Dan and Connie and Sarah.
Thumbs up or thumbs down for the Improvement Association? Laura Bricker, I'm going to start with you.
I'm going to go with thumbs up. This is something that when I first started listening to it, I cringed a little bit when I heard it was about voter fraud, because I was like, oh God, because I felt like I don't want to add fuel to the fire of this drumbeat that's going on around the country. But it's a really interesting story, and it's something that I think people all over the place can relate to if they've ever voted in their local election. I know in my local elections, half the time people don't even know what they're voting on. And when I heard this podcast, I was like, yeah, it's apparently like that in a lot of places. They have to kind of get a little bit of a cheat sheet. But I think, it's definitely very timely. It's told in that sort of very This American Life storytelling style. And it wasn't like my favorite podcast, but I think that it's definitely something that, given this point that we are at in time, is worth listening to.
Toby Ball, what about you? Thumbs up or thumbs down for the Improvement Association?
I like this podcast quite a bit. One thing that's a little bit frustrating, and maybe like if in my perfect world, there'd be like a companion podcast that would probably have like Marsha Chatelain just sort of putting a lot of this stuff into context, because I think, there is like this whole thing where people are suspicious because the black voters are like sort of surreptitiously handing things back and forth between each other. And there's like a whole history of suspicion about black people like secretly plotting, I mean, it goes way back. And somebody.
Wait, so Toby, I'm hearing that you want that in a companion podcast and not actually in this podcast that's about that?
Well, I don't know. It's like, I hate to be constantly like, I would love it if they had a little more context. And like, then every podcast becomes like the podcast plus Toby's context that he wants thrown in. And I think there's a hell of a lot of context to be had. And I could see using this in a class and then having somebody be like, okay, like this is where all this stuff comes from. This all goes back a long ways, and it's it surfaces here in this particular way. So anyway, with that sort of caveat or sort of wish that it existed, I thought it was interesting. I thought they talked to a lot of interesting people. I sort of shared some of your issues about, just make it a little bit clearer, like who's being honest about things and who's not being honest about things. And she does, it is kind of interesting that she does kind of call out, the guys who are the head of the association when they make mistakes or they suddenly turn conspiratorial when they lose an election. And she kind of calls them out for it. But then these white guys, she's not quite is calling out. You're just supposed to kind of take it within the context that that's the case, is that they're full of it. So there's a few little things like that. But for the most part, I thought it was good. I enjoyed it all this in the last one. So it's a thumbs up.
Kevin Flynn?
Yeah, I'm a thumbs up. The Improvement Association has sort of, the sound of the feel sort of a long This American Life piece, but it shares more of a sensibility with Nice White Parents from Serial Productions, more of that than less S-Town. Serial and all, basically the theme that runs through Serial and S-Town and all of these things is that they have high production value, but they deal with falsehoods and an underdog figure. And, if Serial was this team's version of a crime investigation, the Improvement Association is their version of a political expose. The important truth that was revealed to me in listening to this is that I, like many other people, believe if you can just prove that this was false and have people come out and say, no, that didn't happen, and that you wait enough time people will forget and they won't believe these lies anymore. And in this microcosm here, that does not happen. And that is not a good sign for our country right now, because I feel like this is incredibly destabilizing to our nation and to all of our institutions. And so to think, yeah, well, long term, this is all going to work out. I don't know. Somebody in this podcast is ringing a bell, and I don't know how we answer the call, but I'm a thumbs up.
So this is a very, very hard one for me, because in terms of production, reporting, storytelling, all the stuff I would normally measure something by, you can't not give this a thumbs up just for the scope, the execution, and so forth. I have to go thumb sideways on this, and this is grading on a hard curve.
Why?
Because it's for what Toby said. Actually, I was going to be more thumbs up until Toby gave his review, and he actually pointed out to me the thing that was extremely troubling to me about this. This thing didn't need to be what it was and then add a bunch of context. This thing started with a blank slate, a clean canvas, a fair game. Like we're going to go in this as if it's a fair game, where then we're going to show you this X, Y, and Z, and then you can decide for yourself whether the game is fair or unfair. To me, it's not something we need to report. We know it's not a blank canvas. We know it's not a fair game. I would have strongly preferred, because this team is so good at what they do, for the table to be set. This game is not fair. This game is rigged. This canvas has already been tarnished with like weird smudges and black paint, and it's a racist landscape. And here's how it looks. Here's how it plays out. Let's take you through the play and show you what that looks like in real life. That's a big flaw for me. It's a big flaw. And yeah, I mean,
what if they do that in the final episode that comes out tomorrow?
I guess I would be a thumbs up. So I guess I'm a thumbs diagonally sideways up. I'm sorry. I can't love it. I can't. And this is,
it reminds me in baseball when there's an infield fly, you say infield fly.
Listen,
if it's fair.
You know what? It's like great. I know we talk about this a lot. It's like a little bit of a grading on a curve thing, right? This thing on paper is a layup for me to love it. And they just approach it with too much both sidesness in a way that I, in 2021, cannot take. I'm sorry, I just can't. So, yeah, I can't do a full hearty thumbs up. So I'm a tepid thumbs sideways-ish on this Podcasting Improvement Association. It's great work, though. Well reported, beautifully produced. I mean, I can't complain about any of the surface stuff. So
our statistician is going to love quantifying a tepid thumb sideways.
It's really tough. Sorry, statistician. And I'm sorry for you, Kevin, who probably already made a graphic of me saying thumbs up before Toby did his review. Yeah, so thumbs sideways for me on the Improvement Association.
The friendship is sharing deal.
Because I want one of your McNuggets.
And I need some of your Quarter Pounder.
There's a deal for everyone at McDonald's. Get one favorite like 10-piece chicken McNuggets, a Quarter Pounder, or a Big Mac, and get another for just $1. Price and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.
When you're ready to pop the question, the last thing you want to do is second-guess the ring. At BlueNile.com, you can design a one-of-a-kind ring with the ease and convenience of shopping online. Choose your diamond and setting. When you find the one, you'll get it delivered right to your door. Go to BlueNile.com and use promo code WELCOME to get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more. That's code WELCOME at BlueNile.com for $50 off your purchase. BlueNile.com, code WELCOME.
Now it's time for my favorite part of the podcast, a little something I like to call the crime of
the week.
A man in Taiwan was thrilled to tie the knot and then untie the knot, and then tie the knot again. The English language news site Today reports the man got married last April and was able to take the 8 days of his legally entitled to paid marriage leave. When his honeymoon was over, the groom divorced his bride and then remarried her, entitling himself to another 8 days of paid leave. The unidentified man then divorced and remarried a third and fourth time, earning a total of 32 days of paid time off.
Nice.
The bank he works at was not amused. When they only paid for his first leave, he filed a complaint with the government. The Taipei Labor Bureau sided with the worker, making the bank pay a $900 fine and give the groom the rest of his money. The Bureau agreed the man's actions were unethical, but the law is the law.
Thanks, Obama.
Panel, the love-struck banker is good at working the system. What other loophole is he taking advantage of? Laura Bricker, what do you think?
Well, if it was me, he'd be using his wife's email address to get the extra promo code on the shoes that he wants 2 pairs of.
Yes.
But I have to say, I worked with somebody once who actually faked a wedding to get 2 weeks off from work.
Faked a wedding?
Yeah,
the fuck.
And I tracked him down and I outed him.
Of course you did.
Nice.
Oh, Jesus.
Nice. Toy Ball, what do you think? What other loophole is this guy taking advantage of?
I just assume he's going to be switching carriers constantly for his cell phone.
What about you, Kevin?
He may take a penny, but he does not leave a penny.
Oh, man, I hate those people. I hate them. If you do it every time, that's not okay. By the way, a government policy giving you 8 days off for your wedding, that's a pretty great policy. But
fucking good policy.
32 is even better. All right, before we go, Laura Bricker, do we have a cat of the week this week?
Oh, we do. So first, I want to send out a little message to Tori Melching, who lost her 18-year-old cat, Rocky, this week.
Oh,
it was very sad, and I felt so sad for Tori when we saw pictures and heard her story. So, Tori, I hope you're doing better. And I will tell you, in my life, get another cat, maybe 2, when the time is right. Maybe 3.
Or 4.
Or 4. I'm just saying.
Laura, if you could have as many cats as you want, how many would that be?
I think 3 right now is pretty
All
good.
the cats.
But I might have 4. Because that might be better. But anyway.
If I didn't have, just to be fair to you, if I didn't have a full-time job and a second full-time job, I'd have like 6 dogs.
Yeah.
So I totally fucking get it.
No, I would definitely have some more.
Sorry, Kevin.
But actually, our actual cat of the week is a sea lion puppy. What? And this comes to us from Vicky Rowe in Sydney, Australia.
Toby, look at this shit.
Oh, yeah.
Vicky says, here is a sea lion pup on Kangaroo Island. Vicky is working as a volunteer for 2 weeks there on a research project, and the project is working to protect a colony of sea lions, which is in decline from, she says, disease, human impact, and climate change. So I hope this little sea lion survives, and I hope that this project comes up with some ways to make this colony rebound. So thank you, Vicky.
I call bullshit. There's not a cat. It's not a lion. It's not a pup. It's probably not even Australian.
You have to watch out. Sea lions can bite the shit out of you.
Not that one. Look how cute he is.
He's beautiful.
Did you guys watch Arrested Development?
No. What happened to Arrested Development, Toby?
Well, it might be a seal, but Buster gets his hand bitten off.
Wow.
Spoiler alert for a show that happened like 10 years ago. All right, Laura Bricker, if folks want to submit to you their sea lions to be cat of the week or any other kind of animal for that matter, because we take them all, how can they find you on Twitter?
At Laura Bricker.
By the way we get most of them is email, right? CrimeWritersOn@gmail.com.
Facebook and
Facebook.
all over,
email is great. CrimeWritersOn@gmail.com. Toy Ball, folks want to reach out to you and get a picture of your amazing t-shirt. How can they find you on Twitter?
Well, what I'd rather have them do is some friends of mine have a podcast, which is actually the first episode is dropping the day after this drops. It's called Camp Hell, and it's about Camp Aniwaki, but just look up Camp Hell because I don't know how to spell Aniwaki. But there's people who I worked with on Strange Arrivals. It's hosted by Josh Thane, who's a producer on Strange Arrivals. So check it out. It is true crime. It is about a camp and the shitty stuff that happens there. So if you listen to it and you like it, you can tweet about it to me at TobyBallNH.
And Kevin Flynn, if folks want to see your deranged new haircut, how can they find you on Twitter?
I'm at Kevin P. Flynn.
And if you want to follow me on Twitter or Instagram to see all my dogs all the time, you can find me at Reb Lavoie. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Crime Writers On, and I encourage you to join our truly supportive and amazing community in our official Crime Writers On Facebook discussion group. We also have a regular old Facebook page, by the way. Support the show at patreon.com/Partners in Crime Media. You will get the Crime Writers On After Show, Married with Podcast, Laura Bricker's Leave It to Bricker podcast, and Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcast. And subscribe to our newsletter. For God's sakes, it's free at crimewriterson.com. Our theme song was composed and performed by Ty Gibbons. Our line editor is the very handsome Olivia Burdett. The executive producer of this program is Kevin Flynn. This show was recorded in the Yoga Loft above the Bodega in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi studio, otherwise known as Studio C, the closet in our New Hampshire basement, where we are very, very frequently attacked by dogs that look just like loaves of bread. On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you later.
I like the stuff that makes you energized.
Oh, I do the sleep ones.
Yeah.
But I like the sleepy stuff too, so I'm going to get 2 varieties.
Oh.
I'm very excited.
All right, Kevin. Kevin just
They're
like
both the
Kevin's
same,
like,
yeah.
Kevin's like, can we please read some fucking ads now? And stop talking about our marijuana edibles. It's legal, by the way, in case this ends up being the outtake. It's all legal.
It's legal.
Okay.
In another state.
Listen, I have insomnia here in
Not
New
our
Hampshire
state.
too, motherfucker.
Partners in Crime Media.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.